Hey, good morning, Dwayne.
Morning.
How's it going?
Good.
Good.
You?
Oh, just, how else would I want to spend my Saturday morning than, recording some videos? So, all right. So what we're going to do today is that about 6 months ago, I did a video using HighByte, and the whole idea is that I wanted to demonstrate how you take all of this disparate data that sits on a plant floor and how do you normalize it and contextualize it so that you're looking at a whole data set, but looking at it where it's all timed aligned and across multiple, sources of information. Now, even though I only used an OPC connection, so I have a kept server connection here, I could take in all kinds of an API call. I could do a SQL query. I could do any kind of, a CSV file. There's all types of data sources that I could use and get it all published out utilizing a number of the tools we're going to look at today. So a question was asked of me of how else could I do something like this? And so, of course, there's a number of tools that can be utilized for doing it. In many ways, I'm going to recreate the same visualization, but the whole goal here is about how do I bring data, get it contextualized, get it aligned so that I can consume it as a piece of information rather than just disparate data. Is that making sense?
Yep.
All right, cool. So just real quick overview within HighByte. There's three things that you have to do. One is you can see all the connections here. So again, I'm going to be publishing data to SparkPlug-B or to a HiveMQ broker using a SparkPlug-B payload, and I'm going to get all of my data. This is going to be plant floor data to connect it in. So you have to make those connections where I'm getting data and then I'm publishing it back out. Then you create these data models. I have a motor and a compressor, and I only show this because I have some information about the model itself, but I can also have a subcomponent. So imagine I have a compressor with a subclass of type motor, and then I've created some instances of that. So I have compressor one motor, compressor two motor, right? Yep. And then I put that into some flows. So now I have compressor one going to MQTT, compressor two going to MQTT. And in this hub, you can see in this demo rather, you can see I had an IoT hub. This is going to an Azure. And what I eventually did is created this compressor dashboard where I can now look at my flow and discharge pressure by time and that type of thing. Now, while this is really just a visualization that could be easily done, that is correct. The whole point is that I'm able to bring all of this data through together, and I can slice it and dice it however I want within Power BI. The power is that I'm getting all of that information at the exact same moment in time rather than, well, my temperature was from 3 hours ago, so is that really relevant in context of the other data?
Yep.
All right. So first way we're going to start out doing that is using our trusty ignition. And so what I have here is that all of my compressor data is coming in. So let me pop open these tags so that people can kind of get an idea what we're doing. And of course, getting that mouse just in the right spot sometimes is challenging. So what I have done is I have made my OPC connection in there, and I can get into that if you want, but I think people are pretty familiar with making OPC connections in there. I have some sample data that's coming, so real fast. This is in my Kepware server. So here's my compressor data that's coming through. So I've created some tags that will be brought in.
Yep.
So now I've created, and this is how you start to do it with inside Ignition is you want to create a UDT. So within my UDT, I can see I have a motor number. So there is a parameterization of what motor number am I on. And then there's also motor current and speed. So those are the three pieces of data coming out of the motor. And then you can see that I have my exact same data that was coming that I did in HighByte. I have that exact same data set that I'm now going to bring in. So I've created a UDT. And I've created a couple of instances of that UDT. You can see there's a compressor 3 that'll come in because in a later video, I'm actually going to create another set of data, and we're actually going to show how do you actually consume that data across all these systems. Tracking so far?
I am.
All right, groovy.
Motor, that's the last line there is the motor UDT rolled up into the compressor UDT, correct?
Yes. So you can see here, thank you for pointing that out. You can see that I also have the motor UDT. So much like HighByte, I now have that as a part of my instance, also contains an instance of a motor. So just like in HighByte, I can do the exact same thing with the UDT in Ignition.
Yep.
So I've created some instances. You can see here's my compressor 1, and here's my motor 1. Let me go ahead and pop that back out. And let me make that just a little bit bigger so people can are scoring at home can see. Now you can see all that data is changing and it's being reflected up here as well.
Perfect.
So when I'm using the graphs within inside of Ignition, one of the ways that you do that is I could just drag and have a static line across, but what I want to do is make this dynamic so that if I'm looking at compressor 1, I can just go up and hit compressor 1. Now it gives me my compressor 1 data, and I can have a drop down, and I can have, lo and behold, compressor 2 data. Well, the way that you go about doing that within Ignition is that you actually have to set up some dynamic pens. So down at the very bottom here, you see where I have tag pens.
Yep.
I created a link in that, and this is how on that, for doing a cell update, I can actually create, on this tag path, I can create that dynamically. So you see here on row 1, I now have column tag path. It's now that root container selected string value. So I guess I'm getting a little ahead of myself. What I'm doing here is that I created a little drop-down menu, and on that drop-down, I have the text itself as compressor 2, but then I also have the number behind that data set as my selected string value. So it brings in whatever that compressor is itself, and then I get discharge flow. So when I go about and change this compressor number behind, and let me go ahead and pop that open so you can just see the data set real fast. So I've just created this manual. You can see that I have a value and a string value. So I'm going to pull this string value back, and that's now going to go into creating that tag path so it knows exactly how to access that data in there. And so all you have to do, and I've just replicated that across, so now when I do compressor 1, it goes in and brings in compressor 1 and all of that data. So now it's bringing in this compressor 1 information. Drop it down, I have compressor 2. But again, it's what we're doing here is I'm taking all of the same data points and I'm bringing it into a common set of data. So now I'm looking at it all in the exact same time and context. And again, I've just visualized it, but there's all kinds of information that I can do with this. And the other thing that I've done with this is that I've also published it out into an MQTT namespace. So we'll go ahead and get into my engine, and let me pop it out and make it a little bit bigger so people can see. So now I've taken that same data and I've created it out here. And so that information I was bringing in from HighByte. Here's the information that's coming in from HighByte. So here's my models that, if you remember back over here, I'm publishing this back out to an MQTT. I'm now publishing that out. And with this one, now I have to remember exactly what what namespace I'm publishing under. So we're going to take a brief minute. I'll be right back so I can remember what I'm actually publishing this out as. All right, and we're back. So I actually had to create a transmitter in order to make that work. Took a couple of minutes to make that happen, but now you can see that I'm consuming all this information from my OPC server. I'm able to put it into a UDT. I can now visualize it, and of course I've also now utilized the transmitter module so I can actually publish it out to my unified namespace to where all of this compressor comes through. And even though I do have the site still as South Park, that's my generally the one that I use. I would just need to change that over, and it's actually, we're just going to pretend this is at the Langley Falls plant. So that's how everything is get published. So, again, just like HighByte, OPC server, I've put it into a common data structure and I've published it out. The other one's now coming through Jump City. You can see the exact same architecture here where I have all the utilities and the motors and that type of thing. And I also have the same one now also coming in through the Langley Falls. So this will be the ignition piece of that. So any questions thus far?
No.
All right, very cool. So we'll go ahead and close out of this. There's all my settings for the HighByte. So now we're going to get into Canary. And this is one of the things that people always say, well, I already have a historian provider. Why would I want to use Canary Labs? Well, the basic reason is that Canary both publishes and subscribes information. So where I have this set up is on my SCADA client machine. I have this, well, actually I have it on my SCADA dev machine. So I have an OPC collector set up. Here's this local compressor of, it's now connected into the tags. Let's get into that real fast. And you can see that I actually have a set of tags that's now coming through. So there's all of my tags that are coming through the same OPC server. You can see it's got the exact same data structure to it and that type of thing. So what I'm doing with that on this machine, so again, the way that Canary Labs is put together is that I have a collector that's sitting as close to the data set as possible. Now, again, all of these data sets are in my lab, but ideally I would have this sitting at the location of wherever it is. And if I only wanted to have a central enterprise historian, I can do that. And that's exactly what this collector is doing, is it's hitting my local OPC server. And I'm now actually going to be publishing those tags out utilizing the sender service. And that's all going to come into my broader historian. And so in here, where I have that is I have my compressors, and that's all that same data that's now coming through where it's actually getting published. That's the namespace. So now you can see here's all those same tags that come through. So the power of Canary Labs is I can create what's known as virtual views. So I've created a virtual view called compressor, and I use something that is called regex. And so what you want to do is semantically create these asset models, the same thing I've done in HighByte and I've done in Ignition. Now I want to go through and I want to redefine it. So I'm looking at something where I can see compressor 1 with the motor, the exact same structure to it. So what I've done, again, it uses some regex in here, and this isn't a regex tutorial. I will tell you there is one of the blog pages that Canary Labs has done that walks through sort of the 10 most common characters or symbols that you use to semantically create these. So, again, that upward caret, that's always the start at the beginning of line. Look for compressors, add in a period if it exists. And then finally, we want to add in this. So we're looking for numbers. What's that \d, what that gets you? The reason why you put parentheses around is that it creates a group, so that when I now want to create the proper structure, I now use $2, which is the number. So it's the second set. And then I use $1, which is that first set. So now I'm actually just create compressor1.compState. And so that you can see here's my input and this is my output. And I walk through the entire system to where when I finally get down to my compressor, I can create an asset type of compressor. So now I've created or cleaned my data set as it walks through. So this does it in line. And now I have this compressor /D, and I can bring it into compressor state. And actually, that's going to create my model. And then, of course, I've done the same thing with motors as well. And so when I'm done walking through that long tag structure that we looked at earlier, I'm now able to create these asset types of compressors with motors, and I'm going to look at them at once. And so then what I can do inside the Canary Axiom tool is that I can actually create that virtual view as exactly what you're looking at here. I have compressor 1 and compressor 2. And so this is pretty easy to set up, and that all I need to do is create a screen. I need to assign an asset instance. So in this case, my asset instance is that virtual view of compressor. And you can see that's what I've done here. And that when I'm done with it, and there's a little more that's going on here behind the scenes. So I've now created some data flows. So here again, it's that same thing of data flow and pressure by time, all that same information. I've also created a nice little table in here so I can just quickly see what's the current state of that compressor, how many times is it cycled in the last 10 minutes, how many times is it cycled in the last 60 minutes. These are all tools that are built inside Canary, so I can create some very great applications in that. And again, just like I could do with some of the other drop downs, I can now bring in the new data for that compressor too. I have to say one thing I haven't figured out is why this very first one up here always has to start drawing from the very beginning. I tried to solve that problem, but the upshot is now I've been able to take all of that data. I'm able to normalize it, contextualize it, instead of looking at all these 16 disparate tags, I'm now able to create an asset called compressor 1, compressor 2. So another piece of Canary, if that wasn't good enough.
So the historical data where the on-off times that you've got there, you wouldn't really be able to build that in HighByte because you don't have the history, correct?
No, actually you could. You would just, you do have the ability over here, and I didn't show that, but in my models, I can actually create, get in my details, I can actually start building in some, in the type, excuse me, I need to be on my instances here. So when I bring that in,
yep,
I have this expression field here. I could actually utilize it mathematically using some JavaScript. I could take this comp state and I could actually look back and forth. Now within Canary, it does it right away, but I could build an expression where I could actually create that 10-minute, 60-minute interval just to get a count that comes from that. but I
Gotcha.
don't have that specific one built in here. But yeah, you absolutely could. All right, so let's get back over here. And so then the last thing that this Canary will do is now I can actually have a publisher where I can actually go out and, much like I had some publishes of some other information, there's my compressor publisher. This is actually going to a Hive MQ cloud instance, but I now have tags that are being published. And so let's go ahead and configure that. So here's my compressors. So again, these are all the virtual views that I have in here. Here's compressors. I'm going to publish it over MQTT. So I'm now going to go into my Highland utilities. So this is all coming from the Highland plant. And now I just bring in that compressor. So if we go back over here and look at our tags, and I'm just using Ignition because it's a little bit easier to view those tags, I can now come into my Highland location, expand that out. There's my utilities. There's my compressor virtual view. And now you can see I have the exact same data that's coming through. So once again, most people have OPC. They will have a historian. I can now take that historian, do virtual view with it, so I can bring it all together, normalize, contextualize it, and I can publish that data out as a set right within the Canary Labs tool, so that I end up with some, again, it's information that I am now consuming, or it's data that I'm consuming. It is information that I'm publishing back out utilizing a unified namespace throughout the architecture. So here now I have 3 different tools grabbing the same data set, but largely doing the exact same thing with it. So you can see all of that information there.
Got it.
All right. I'm going to take a pause here because my throat. All right. So now we'll just close out of here. So any questions on how the Canary Labs got put together?
No, I don't think so. The biggest challenge for me is still trying to decide, okay, what would I do, where, and why, and
Sure.
Kind of following that through.
It becomes a that's really the pick of it. Well, oh my gosh, now I have all these different tools that I could use to do the exact same thing. Which one should I pick? And that's
Yep.
all a function of what is the problem you're trying to solve, both the immediate problem as well as what are we ultimately trying to do. Every project or everything we do should be part of a larger whole, so that we don't want to build in any technical debt of, oh my gosh, I now built all this stuff in, and it's, oh, you know what, I need to do this, and I can't do it with the tool set that I currently have. Now,
Yep.
the upside of utilizing a technology stack is that, well, I can at least get that information somewhere where I can use it. So, for instance, on that unified namespace, if I have some kind of machine learning algorithm that will consume Spark-Plug-B data, I could take all my data sets, and in other plants, I might have different tools that I utilize based on the plant itself and how I want to consume that information that I create. But I can also put in a machine learning algorithm that now takes a look at a constant data set across there. That's why building these models is so important. The really cool thing is that I can actually have 2 different machine learning type applications running, and then I decide which one fits my needs the best in terms of, can I support it, can I utilize it, that type of thing.
Yeah, essentially, there's no limit. You can do whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So the last piece we're going to look at here is FrameworX, and so this is, I'm inside the FrameworX or Tatsoft inside their factory and studio, and in their development environment. And so what I'm
Yep.
doing is I have all kinds of connections that I can make. So these are native drivers right out of the box that you get within the FrameworX platform.
Yep.
And one of them, you can see it's going to have all your typical connections in terms of PLCs and those types of things. There's also various historians. There's actually a very tight integration with Canary Labs historian because they're both built on .NET. So what I do is I now create that connection. So one of them is an OPC UA channel. So that's the first thing you set up is, what's the type of information I'm now going to consume. Now I want to create a node of that information, and for here, I'm going to use that same Kepware server, and I can define all of that information. So this is just sitting on this local machine here. One of the things that you currently have to do within the 9.1 release, and this is a little bit different than in the 9.2 release that's going to be coming out here soon, is that I have to do some work around some certificates to get this set up. So
Yep.
there's a really great document that walks you through how to do it. So you on there, the T server application and on the T run application. So again, we're on the server. When I get into running this environment, I actually have to go in and create certificates so that I can connect into that OPC server both when I'm configuring it and setting it up here in the enterprise or in the development environment, and then when I actually launch the application itself, I need another certificate that's created. So you can see over here in the corner that I had to bring back the certificate for the KEP server itself, and then I also had to create a couple of certificates. One's the T manager, that's again this application here, and then the T run, so a runtime instance itself. And with Kepware, what I can do is I can actually sync this where I can actually go out and I can read all of the tags that are sitting on that OPC server. And you can see there's quite a few of them, but I'm able to go through and pick and choose. And we'll look at adding in some additional tags in a future video. And so once I'm done doing that, I can actually take those that same data set, create all of my tags, and you can see those are now get lined up with that KEP server. So you can see the exact same namespace of how I get there. Is all setting there as well. In order to create that same number of displays within FrameworX is because everything is object-based. So when I have a view, I actually have to create I have to create an instance for everything that I'm doing there. And so one of the things that I'm using is as part of their scripting engine, and I'll break this down a little bit, but fundamentally to get those tags done dynamically so that I can have compressor 1, compressor 2, is that I've actually had to name those chart pens or the chart itself and the pen. So we're going to get a little into the weeds here, but so stop me when things aren't making sense, and then we'll just walk through exactly what it is that we're doing here. So when I come to my tags, and unlike say a UDT or in light of a UDT, I can create what's known as templates. So here I've actually created a template that is now called a trend chart with some tags. And I also have an array. This actually is 4 because it's 0 index. So I can now have up to 4 pens on each one of my trend chart types. And so I have trend chart and I have trend pen. So when you use their trend tool that comes out of the box, these are all of the parameters that are available that are part of that trend chart class of objects. So this is all using .NET or C#. I can create a class of an object. So this class type of trend pen, here are all the attributes and properties that are associated with that. And so now what I've done is in this script is of my first trend chart and my first pen, visualize this information. So that tracking so far?
Yeah, which is 0, so that would be nothing at that point. Right?
It'd be it'd be pen 1. This is all 0 index. So the very first chart, very first pen is on my compressor number. Very first chart, the second pen is going to be my compressor number.
Gotcha.
And so I've created some tags so I can actually reference these back forth. So if you remember, we recently had that FrameworX building a unified namespace on FrameworX, and they said, how do you do multiples? And you have to create instances of that. That's exactly what we've done. We've created a placeholder tag that has a type trend chart and a type trend pen, so that when I actually come over to draw my compressor screen, I'm actually going to have my chart. And you can now see of my ID, I have bind to this tag chart 0, so that first one, and my chart pen of 0, and then I also have a chart pen of 1. And so I'm now using that to populate this information. I also have a compressor tag that's up here. So I've created a drop down where I actually have tied into this compressor number itself. So let's go back over to the tag here itself, and on my objects, I have a compressor number sitting somewhere in here. Compressor number, comp number. So I'm now using that as an integer. So again, going back to the script, that's where I'm getting my compressor number. When I get into my draw, I've created this my index on a combo box, and you can see that I've now selected tag is that compressor number. And then of course I've created a drop down or the selector items where my first one, my index 0 is select compressor, and then I have compressor 1, 2, 3, and 4. So when I have compressor 1, it binds this to that tag.comp number, right?
That took care of the 0, select compressor.
Exactly. That's exactly what you did. So it's sort of a little, it's a trick that you can use to do that.
Yep.
And so I've created the exact same thing. So I have this drop down and I can dynamically assign those. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to run this. Now you can see there's all of my charts that I've created. And I just come down, select my compressor pen 1. And now it starts to populate the information there. And it doesn't seem to be working.
Now we get.
Oh, now it's coming through.
That's coming through.
Something is awry here.
The
It likes the compressor 2 data. We'll just pretend that compressor 1 thing never happened.
yeah.
So, again, taking that exact same data, you can see, once again, I connected into an OPC server. I have made some objects out of that so I can actually consume the data that's there. And then I will show you quickly, and we'll get into a little more details, that I can actually take this same information and I can publish it back out to a broker. So we'll go ahead and come back over here into my edit under my tags. And it's a little bit different, into my devices. And it's a little bit different when you want to utilize these Sparkplug-B payload. So again, another feature of 9.2 is that I will be able to dynamically connect into an OPC server, and I will be able to dynamically publish out to an MQTT broker using a Sparkplug-B format. So again, coming into my channels, you saw right now within 9.1, and I believe there's certain versions of it, is that I have to create a publish and I have to create a subscribe, because there's a couple of different protocol options that you have. There's a document that walks it through on FrameworX. So then I create this node of a sub and a pub. And again, you can see that I have the exact same broker that I'm going to. This is a HiveMQ broker. And now I create some points. And we'll get into a little more details in a future video of how I actually publish. So that's coming into my G5, into my Metroville location is where we are here. So again, we'll just come back over to Ignition because it's a little bit easier to visualize tags here. I can now come over to my Metroville location where I've assigned all those tags. I can come in, Metroville, Utilities, Compressor 1. Now, something I want to demonstrate or show here is that in my Metroville, you see that Ignition is consuming that compressor as a UDT. And I think this, because I'm on a 9.1.18, this is a pre-release version. It looks like some of the data isn't getting fed through the way that it should. I believe that'll get taken care of in future. But you can see all that exact same information is getting published out as a UDT. So I don't have area and asset ID populated in this because I didn't build those specific tags. But you can see I'm able to see all of that. You also notice that when I went back to when I created my compressor types, let's go back to the tags. So I created a template, much like we use the trend chart and Chen pens. I have a type compressor that also has a type motor. So if I come down to my motor, now I can come in here. And so this is all the information that'll come through there. And then I've created instances of that. So on that object, get back over here to my devices. I've now created that Metroville Utilities, and now I have motor vibration that's going with that tag. And you just have to manually line all these up. And then I'm actually publishing out on this tag. Like I said, we'll get into a little more details of building it to how to publish it. But again, you can see that there are 4 compressors or 4 instances of that compressor that I've created. And I believe that is in my template piece itself. There we go. So, yeah. So here on my utilities, I've actually created this these compressors. There's 4 of them that are being created, although here on my actual devices, I'm only publishing out the one of those. But you can see that it's now that data is published. So again, original video is using HighByte. I took in some disparate data. I brought it together, made a model out of it. In the original video, I published it both to a broker and to an IoT hub so I could create a Power BI visualization. Again, the point is that I need to have a normalized data set and contextualized data set that I can work with. It's data in context or information. So I can do that with HighByte. I can do that with Ignition. I can do that with Canary Labs, and I can do that with FrameworX. And it's all publishing into a common data set. So now you can see inside my unified namespace, every one of my sites is now published in the exact same set of data, and it's bringing it through in a common, contextualized, normal format that I can now consume. So if I want to start doing some analytics at the higher level, I can look at 4 different sites using 4 different pieces of technology, but I'm able to consume all of that and start making some predictive characteristics out of that. Pretty sweet, huh?
Yeah, very sweet.
All right, so Next video we're going to do is I mentioned earlier, we're going to look at, okay, so what happens and what's involved in actually creating, if I create a new compressor out there, how do I do that with inside of these 4 tools? And we'll look into that here shortly. So I guess we'll see you back here soon.
Very good.